Hi, everyone. My name is Rez Graham. I'm an AI programmer at Maxis, and I work on The Sims. So today we're going to talk about The Sims Medieval specifically, and how we went about building various NPCs and stuff on Medieval. So for those who don't know, Medieval is a medieval simulation game. So we took The Sims 3, and which is a big, large, sort of open world type system, and we brought it back in time to medieval times. We also added an RPG element, so there are classes and levels and things like that. So you can play a monarch, you can play a wizard, you can play a blacksmith, and so on. And then you go on quests and all of that. So one of the big things that we had to do was we wanted to fill out the world quite a bit. And the system that we used to fill out this world had to be very reusable, scalable, data-driven, all that, because we're going to have hundreds of these guys around, hundreds of different ones. And as engineers, our job is to not ever have to do any work whatsoever. So we build a system once, and then let the designers do all of basically let the designers build up whatever they want to build up. So the real purpose of this was to make the world come alive and breathe life into our NPCs. That was the big thing. The way that we did this, well, first we'll meet the Royal Advisor. So the Royal Advisor, this is Octavio, our Royal Advisor. The Royal Advisor is one of these NPCs, and the one that I'm going to use as my big example. So he or she was someone who existed in the world or lived in the castle and worked these crazy long hours and existed in this world to write documents, scribe laws into existence, send letters so you'd see him walk over and open up this little pigeon coop, tie a little note and say, off the pigeon goes, our little courier pigeon. So he had to do all of these little things. He had to act like this, for lack of a better word, medieval secretary. And that was basically his purpose in the world. So we defined these types of things, and we started thinking about it, and we said, OK, so what we're really defining here is a role or a function within the universe. So in our particular case, these roles are requested by different locations. So for example, we could have the wizard, and we could say, we want the wizard to have an apprentice, or we want the blacksmith to have an apprentice, or we want shoppers to be in the marketplace. So we base it on the location. The location would then request these types of people. So the palace, in our case, the throne room, requested the Royal Advisor here. We could find special outfits. Those outfits were defined in data entirely. And we had CAS artists. CAS stands for Create a Sim. So we'd have a Create a Sim artist go in and say, here's the uniform that we want. We want them to have this sort of blue tunic thing with the helmet and all of that kind of stuff. So we could define as much or as little of the uniform as we wanted. One of the NPCs was the witch who I think always had red hair and always had a particular dress and was always female. So we could be as very strict and specific as we wanted to, or we could be as general as we wanted to and say, just randomize a sim. Give me anyone. It also determined things like spawn locations. So one of the design goals for this particular sim is to live in the castle. So that means that this sim had to live in the castle. So we defined a special bed and a special object for them to say, this is where you exist. Which effectively gave us this Downton Abbey downstairs style. So he was a part of the downstairs. So he would go into this magic little back room and cease to exist. And then it also puts a schedule. So schedules, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is the way that we really defined the behavior of that sim. So all of these put together defined what was a role. And it was actually fairly easy. This here is the XML, and the fact that I can fit the entire data description for a single role onto one slide here at GDC shows you how fairly simple it was. Really, you have the visuals here, so you see the CAS outfits. You have the spawn bed here. In our case, it's bed throne room 2F door 1, which is a fancy object name that says, I go to this particular door, and there's a magic object behind it that I'll go route to and vaporize when I'm gone. That was nice because it allowed us to have 100 or 150 or 200 sims in the world without having to incur the cost of having all of them sleeping at night. And finally, we have the schedule here, which is just a symbolic reference to the specific schedule that this sim does. And a number of other things. Can this sim get married? Does this sim live nearby? And all that kind of stuff. So, as promised, schedules. Schedules drive behavior. They're the where, the what, and the who, really. I guess the who is the role. So they drive the where do I go, the what do I do, and the when do I do it. This was all split into these time blocks or time slots. So each slot would define, here are the places that it's valid for me to go. Here are the things that it's valid for me to do. And really, it's kind of like us, right? It's us at work. From, our core hours are 10 to 6. And so during those hours at Maxis, we have to be in a particular place at a particular time doing a particular set of things. And so that's exactly what we built here. As I said, the time slots themselves very specifically define the valid locations. But we had a bunch of other cool tools that we could use, such as locking motives. So if you're familiar with The Sims, you know that motives are things like hunger and energy and fun and social and hygiene and bladder and all those fun things. There's also a whole bunch of hidden ones that drive traits and that kind of stuff. So if I'm evil, I have a desire to every now and then do some kind of, basically be a dick to somebody. So I can lock these motives if I feel like I want to. We did that when it became necessary to have a sim, when we felt that the behavior looked bad. A very prime example of this was quest NPCs. So we would, sometimes, in a big simulation world, what you really want, especially for this RPG type thing, is you want a sim to go over here and stand there with a big exclamation point above their head and not do any kind of like, oh, I have to go find a chamber pot, so off I go, and then the player has no idea where this sim went. So we can lock any of those things. We also have a special work motive, which I'll talk about in a moment, but that was the thing that says, do your job. Any of the gaps in the schedule, so we looked at it and we're like, well, we can define sort of 24/7 what they do. But we thought, no, why don't we just let the gaps exist? Whatever gap exists in the schedule, the sim will do whatever they want. And that's just Sims 3 behavior. They just went and did their typical thing. So they would go anywhere and do whatever they wanted. It was actually really satisfying to watch. Sometimes when the Royal Advisor gets off of work or any other sim, they're like, well, I'm done. I'm going to go to the bar. And then they go to the bar and drink, much like all of us do. The work motive. So it really controls interaction availability. Not everyone can sit at this desk that's right here and scribe on that scroll or do any of those things. That's really what the work motive is for. So it's the thing that really causes them to score it and to care about it, and it mixes in with just everything else. Which is actually really cool and lets us do some interesting things. It's a special type of motive. We call it internally, we use a fancy term called static commodity, which means that it's something that always remains constant. The sim always wants to fulfill it, but they can't actually fulfill it, which is sort of evil. But it's how it works at work. Like, there's always more work to do, so I always desire to do this thing. Here's a visual representation of it, where I have a fairly linear curve there defining fun. So the fun desire is this linear thing. If my fun is full, then I'm like, I'm sort of good. It doesn't matter that much. I'll take care of other things. If my fun is really low, then my desire is extremely high. I really want to take care of this thing. But the desire for my work commodity is always going to be at some particular point. And it's just a flat number, which means that you get some really cool little emergent behavior that happens there, some cool behavior. So what typically happens is the Royal Advisor will get up and they'll go to work and they'll start writing on this thing, right? And then after a while, they'll be like, well, I've been doing this for a long time and I don't want to do it anymore because I'm really hungry and I haven't talked to anybody all day. So then they'll get up and they'll walk upstairs and they'll make some food and then they'll chat with somebody and then they'll go back downstairs and do their job. So it seems pretty much like real life, which was really cool. It was really satisfying to watch that happen. So let's look at their schedule. The schedule looks basically like this. This is the actual schedule I think that we shipped. And so from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m., he'll be in the throne room. And then we have multiple lots here, which define from 11 a.m. to basically 1800 hours, which I think is 6 p.m. They can go to multiple different places. And then from 1800 hours to 2 a.m., they'll be back in the throne room. So he works from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m., which is a long time, much like the games industry. if they're in the spy quarters, if they're in the spy quarters, the reception hall, or the barracks, they can't solve for energy, nor can they solve for hunger. So we're like, we'll just lock them. And then that's their work motive. So when we put it all together, what we have is we have this really cool sim that goes to work every day, works their ass off in their throne room and wherever else happens to be developed, and then happily goes, well, somewhat happily goes and goes off to the bar probably to drink at 3 in the morning when he's off work. And we use this everywhere. Everywhere, right? All of the hero sims, the quest sims, the townies, other role sims, all of them used this same technology. The jester, the guards, the spy, they all used the same thing, which was really cool. Now, I gave you a relatively trivial example. A slightly less trivial example, this was not always as easy, was something like the servant. So this is our servant. The servant is a little different because what we want to do is we want to be able to have the servant interact specifically with play off of another role. In our case, the monarch. So the monarch doesn't autonomously go and make food. They're not going to go make food. They're the monarch. They have people for that. So we have to basically make an interaction on the servant that says, make me food, which the king will then score and say, I'm hungry. I'm going to go have this person make me food. Also, the correct place for the servant to be is wherever the monarch is. So if you walk to the tavern as the monarch, the servant will follow you, which is really cool. So that is really what we did. That was the big, our big sort of secret sauce in terms of getting all of these NPCs into the world. It was very scalable. It was very doable. We had hundreds of these guys doing various different things. And as engineers, we created very little extra behavior. We just created these systems and allowed the designers to build all of that stuff. So thank you.
Okay, so how many of you have had the following experience? Your lead designer or creative director comes to you and asks, we want to have a new enemy NPC. What ideas do you have? This is pretty common. It gets a lot more complicated, though, when a tight deadline is introduced into the mix, and we're all familiar with that in the games industry. So today, I'm going to walk through this very example by examining a particular enemy that we added to Warframe. So first of all, some of you might be asking, what is Warframe? Warframe is a free-to-play, online, co-op, third-person action shooter. It's basically space ninjas with machine guns. You play missions on procedurally generated maps, you rank up your weapons and your powers, and we're constantly improving and adding and expanding the game. Here's a quick trailer just so everyone knows what we're talking about. Okay, so we needed to create a new enemy for the Grineer faction, for a new map tile set that we were expanding. So we first looked at the rest of the NPCs in the Grineer faction to see if we could find a role that was different, challenging, and fun. The Grineer are a very militaristic faction, and they're also very heavily armored. They all wear these big powered armor suits and quite bulky. They also have a lot of different roles already covered. They've got melee enemies that come in right up into your face. They've got a short-range engagement, flamethrowers and shotgun guys. For mid-range, we have assault rifles, sniper rifles for a little bit longer range, We've got some heavy units with miniguns, rocket launchers, and so on. And there's a couple of other kind of special units that have their own unique powers. So they cover a lot of ground right there. However, all these enemies here in the faction tend to use cover a lot. They run to cover and they fire from those positions. So it would be different if we had an NPC that would eschew cover and actually confront the players in the open. The next thing we did was look at the environment that this NPC would inhabit. We were releasing a new desert settlement expansion, and so we've got these sandy dunes, these rocky canyons and outcrops, some ancient ruins, and these kind of industrial platforms. It's a bit like Dune meets Mad Max. For the most part, this environment was also going to be much more open than our previous kind of spaceship ones. And we'd have large spaces open to the sky, ledges, different levels. So having an NPC that can move and reposition quickly in this environment would be another key differentiating factor. Normally the players are used to having kind of the king of the mobility, but so having an NPC who could catch up would be a challenge. So this is what we came up with. We could equip him with a jetpack, and it would give him a nice mobility boost, added speed. He could use this jetpack defensively as well to dodge from side to side from enemy fire. We also decided to give him a really cool signature attack. He could kind of hover up into the air and launch a swarm of missiles at his target. And this would not only look badass, but it would make him a serious threat as well. So we then needed to look at the technical considerations to bring this guy to life. Firstly, we use a behavior tree for our NPCs, and our behaviors are written in C++. And then we assemble those behaviors into a tree in Data, and we can fiddle and tweak parameters in Data as well. But this allowed us to implement any specific code required in the behaviors themselves, and we wouldn't pollute the rest of the code base. Our animation system also supports warping anim-driven movement. So this allows us to play an animation that's going to move that character and actually warp the movement so that he ends up at an exact desired position and orientation. So this was going to be great for us to use for our dodges, for him to dodge left and right. All we needed to do is find a suitable position to dodge to, and we could just trace along the nav, see if there was enough space, and return a suitable position. For the special attack, initially we thought that we could just do this purely in animation, just hand it over to the animators and let them have free rein. It would be trivial for them to do that. However, we really needed to prototype something quite quickly, and we couldn't wait for the animation department to give us these anims. So we created some code that would procedurally control the movement of the hover attack, and this allowed us to also tweak and play with a bunch of the different parameters. How fast should he rise up into the air? How high should he hover? How long should he stay airborne? All these things we could play around with. And then once we knew what we wanted from a gameplay perspective, we could go to the animators and say, hey, make us an animation that's this long and has these requirements. So cue the A-Team music. The initial prototype just reused some existing assets and took maybe a day or two, including the new flocking swarm missiles. And after this, we got the animation team on board ASAP. We worked really quickly with the animators to get everything working, and there was a lot of constant back and forth tweaking of the animations and polish until we were happy. Here is a quick kind of video showing the, I have no mouse, showing the dodge animations at different stages during the iteration process. You can see the top was the earliest one and the bottom one was the final one that we shipped. The biggest challenge here is to make the animations characterful and believable, but also have them quick enough to be suitable for gameplay. We're an incredibly fast game, and if we had a good long animation that had a reasonable anticipation phase, an action phase, and a recovery phase, that would be too long for our NPC to dodge out of the way of the bullets coming in. He'd be dead. And squashing all of that into kind of 15 frames or something would be way too much to ask for from your animators. The key really is to identify the core, the important bits that you want to portray in that animation, in our case moving out of the way, and focus on making that part really quick, and we could spend more time on the recovery phase. So while we were working on the animations and the behaviors, the concept and character art team got on board with the design for the jetpack. And then we moved on to the hover attack as well. In the end, we actually ended up using the procedural movement instead of animation-driven. It didn't take much more time for us to polish up the prototype, and it gave us much more control over the height and the duration of the attack. And we could vary that at runtime as well, so they wouldn't all hover exactly 4 meters in the air. And we just used the animations that they gave us to dress it up. The sound and the visual effects came on board too. The jetpack really sets these guys apart, so it was important for them to have a unique, identifiable sound. It's also important for that sound to fit the character and feel of the enemy faction. And the Grineer have this kind of grungy, mechanical vibe going on, and it was important for that to come across. So this is what the sound guys hooked up for us. And that's pretty awesome. It's got that really gritty, grungy feel. The visual effects are another important factor. Hovering in the air, launching a devastating attack is quite a threat, and the players need to be able to see him, to target him, so he needs to be visible and stand out from the environment, and that's what the thrusters, effects, and the smoke and everything else point towards him. So everything looks like it's going well, but at this point, the lead designer comes in and throws a spanner in the works. They love doing that. So we were already working on some long jumps, getting him to move quickly through the environment, but they also wanted us to be able to have him traverse the environment in a more general way. Could he jump up onto a ledge from the ground? Could he jump across from one platform to another platform? Could our navigation system support this? We already have explicit off-nav bridge actions. The level designers can place these to do vault overs and jump ups and downs and so on. But we didn't really have time for the LDs to go and mark up all the environment, and at the same time, if we did this, the jetpacks would be restricted to only using those particular routes that the LDs had planned. So we needed a more free-form approach. The concession we made was that they would only use this movement if they had a clear line of sight to their target. If they had a clear line of sight, there was a reasonable chance that there was obstacle-free space for a jump. All we needed to do was check the nav, find a suitable landing position, do a couple of raycasts just to check that the overall geometry wasn't in the way, and we could then kind of dynamically create this off-nav bridge, which would get them from one nav island to another island. And this could all be self-contained in a behavior that just sat at the top of our behavior stack and monitored the path that he was following to jump ahead in time. The only other things that they wanted from us to do was a targeting challenge, being able to shoot the jetpack off him to deal extra damage. And also, if you killed the Hellion mid-combat, that his jetpack could go careening off randomly through the environment and explode in a gory fashion. It was quite simple to add a projectile when he died, and this paid off with some really awesome moments. You could come into an area, kill the Hellion, and have his jetpack careen off into some exploding barrels, and it would create this chain reaction of destruction, which was pretty awesome. Everything came together very, very quickly, probably around 3 weeks or less, and he got a very positive response from the community, mainly because he was so different. Here's a gameplay video showing him in action.
Get.
Okay, so it's important to kind of appreciate how the whole team had to come together, all from different departments, and work to really make this NPC shine. I hope you've enjoyed this brief insight into the process of giving life to a new NPC, and a big thanks to everyone at DE who helped throw this presentation together quickly. Thank you.